the network in order to fulfill that phone call. We can do something a little bit similar by isolating bands of spectrum and parts of the network for individual use cases. This slide, you see things like base services. So one of the things that I do at 5G Labs is I work on a project at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar where we're testing a number. You might have, if you've seen the movie Top Gun, you know what that base is. But we're testing a number of different use cases for 5G around this exact thing that I'm describing, things that are very different from each other and have very different Boston and London. Each one focuses on a different aspect of 5G. LA is pretty cool in that it has our sports facility in it, so we're using 5G to do analytics on how athletes perform in a practice environment and then also develop that through further training. But we also do things around music and entertainment. DC is a little different in that I run our DC lab where I focus primarily on smart cities and first responder technologies. I think I kind of just touched on that. And the next slide. I really owe everyone here a huge congratulations on surviving your first 5G lecture in education class. So I'll be here for a while. I'll take any questions afterwards because I don't know we're fairly limited on time. And I want to hand things over to Maglev, but please feel free to reach out. And then first name dot last name Dominic.Bonaduce at Verizon.com. I publicly give that out because I know none of you will be able to spell it off the top of your hand, but I'll give it to you afterwards. No problem.
Thanks, Dominic. And this week, because of that, I have to get a 5G.
You gotta get a 5G.
So now I'm on the 5G network. And Italian, I assume, right?
I am Italian. I have an Italian last name. I am more Mexican than anything else.
Really?
Yeah.
So you speak Italian and Spanish?
It's shameful. I speak neither.
All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you. This is great. And I'm sure with these projects like this, it's bringing to Maryland especially, to build the 5G technology, and with Jaime Paniagua, who's directly involved in that kind of projects, it's exciting to see how the small businesses again are going to take advantage of the infrastructure that is going to be built, to build these networks.
Yeah, and I didn't touch on it too much because I'm not a salesperson when it comes to selling 5G and putting that stuff out there. I explore the use cases, but what small businesses will immediately be able to take advantage of first is going to be your fixed wireless access. It's going to be getting access to commercial internet, much like you would at home, but without having to be limited to where your Verizon service is. And so I don't have to have, wait a month for them to run fiber to my building. I can access it over 5G. And that's going to unlock things from processing payments if you run a storefront to just running your construction office.
So no more last mile issues.
No more last mile issues. That's the dream.
Thank you. That's exciting stuff. Thank you so much. So now we're gonna move to the possibility of having the fastest train in the world. Go ahead.
Well, instead of the notion of planes, trains, and automobiles, we're going on, automobiles, broadband, and super trains, right? In that aspect. That's the theme of today in that aspect. But certainly, well, by the way, correct, before I go to our next guest speaker, you said your bio was a little outdated, but is this outdated? That you were Time Magazine's Person of the Year?
In 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Google it. That year it had a mirror on it and it said you. I don't know where you found that bio. That is an old.
We dug it in.
Hey, I use 5G to find it. So our next guest speaker, and hopefully I say your first name right, Ian Rainey, serves as the Senior Vice President at the Northeast Maglev, which is formed to promote high-speed rail solutions in the Northeast Corridor using JR Central superconducting maglev technology. So that's a mouthful there, but certainly look forward to your presentation and thank you for being one of our guests here.
Great, thank you. Thank you to RG and to the Chamber so much for the opportunity to talk to you. And I have a short presentation. I just would like to bring everybody up to speed on our efforts to bring this train, this is the superconducting maglev train, to the Northeast Corridor to connect Washington, D.C. and New York, but with a first segment between D.C. and Baltimore. So before I dive in, let me just make an important point. What you're looking at here, this is an actual photograph of the train that is operating today in Japan, west of Tokyo. And that's, I think, really important because when a lot of people think about high-speed rail or they hear things like maglev, they say, oh, well, does that really exist? Or is it a concept or a prototype? Or is it like a Hyperloop thing or something? And the answer is no, it's none of those things. It is an actual train that is running today in Japan at 300 miles per hour. In fact, Governor Hogan has ridden the train with his wife, I think, on the same visit after South Korea that you mentioned. I believe he went to Japan and rode the train in 2015 with his wife. We've had numerous delegations over there. So I guess what I'm trying to say or emphasize is that this train really exists, unlike a lot of other train technologies that we have been hearing about quite a bit in the last few years. So I have a short video on the next slide. Hopefully we are 5G enabled and this will play without any difficulty.
We didn't know we needed a faster horse until someone gave us a faster horse. We didn't know we needed to travel through the air or across the sea or beyond the sky until someone showed us we did. These noble pursuits, the ones that take visionary leaders and leaps of faith, those are the ones that carry us by leaps and bounds into the future. We may not know we need the world's fastest train because we don't realize it's much more than a fast train. It will redefine geography and bring distant cities radically closer together. To travel from New York to Washington, D.C. in just an hour's time changes the dynamics of where and how we live. It means waking up in Georgetown and going to work in Midtown. It means that millions of commuter hours can be reclaimed and spent more valuably. And ideas, leadership, and talent can be nimble enough to leap from city to city in mere minutes, allowing us to travel as fast as our ambitions. It's not just a train. It's thousands of new infrastructure jobs, the likes of which hasn't been seen in decades. By uniting a region that makes up the 5th largest economy in the world, this train will unlock tremendous potential. driving growth, opportunity, and commerce at every station stop. This isn't just a train. It's an opportunity for America to take a quantum leap forward for the future of travel and create a legacy of generations to come. We may not know we need it today, but once we take that leap, we'll never look back.
Wow, I got the chills.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So if we could go to the next
Oops.
slide,
We didn't know we
Hold on.
needed
we
a
can watch
fast
it
track.
again.
There you go.
So before I dive in, I'll just say a couple words about who we are. For folks who are following the project, and some of you may have heard about it or are following it, others are not, and that's fine. But there's a couple of different private companies involved in the Maglev project, and I get a lot of questions about, are you the same company, or are you competitors? So the first company that's involved in this project is called BWRR, Baltimore Washington Rapid Rail. That's like the project developer. That's the entity that's gonna raise the financing for the project. It'll oversee construction, and then it'll oversee the operation and maintenance of the system. I'm a part of BWRR. But that's the railroad. It's the developer, and it's going to become the railroad. Northeast Maglev, and I'm kind of wearing my Northeast Maglev hat tonight, is sort of the company that does public relations and marketing, lobbying, consulting. So there's a bunch of reasons why we created two different companies, but anyway, it's basically the same people, the same mission, and the same project. What's really important is that we're all closely aligned with Central Japan Railway Company, and that's the company in Japan that has developed this Maglev system, and they provide us with consulting services, technical expertise, advice, all that kind of stuff. But they don't own us. We are American-owned companies. JR Central is there to help us with the technology, help us make sure that we're designing the system correctly. So we're very closely partnered with them. For anyone who's ever been to Japan, chances are you have ridden on one of JR Central's trains. They actually operate the world's first high-speed rail system, which was built in 1964. It's the world's oldest high-speed rail system. It connects Tokyo to Nagoya to Osaka using the really iconic bullet train. And that is the busiest high-speed rail system in the world. They move 150 million passengers per year. It's an astonishing fact, but it is absolutely true. The average delay per train over the course of an entire year on that system, and remember, they move 150 million people per year, the average delay per year is less than 30 seconds, and that includes massive earthquakes. So in terms of service and reliability, it is the gold standard in high-speed rail in the world. So we're very privileged to have them as our technical partner and technology provider. The reason for Maglev is that bullet train system, it is absolutely a capacity. They cannot add more trains to that system, but the demand in Japan is growing. Notwithstanding the fact people say, well, Japan's population is getting older and declining. Overall, that's absolutely true, but between Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, it's actually increasing pretty dramatically. And so they need a new system, and they foresaw that over half a century ago. They knew that their bullet train would just reach capacity at some point. And they started thinking very early on about, well, how are we going to deal with that in 50 years' time or 75 years' time? And they actually adopted an American technology, superconducting maglev, and I'll explain a little bit what that is in a minute. They started trying to figure out how can we turn this into a really cutting-edge transportation system. And they have come a long way, and they're actually now running this train in Japan, west of Tokyo, and they're going to connect it all the way from Tokyo to Nagoya very soon, 2027. Next slide. A question we get asked pretty often, and I think it's very legitimate, is, Maglev, that sounds really cool, but why do we need it? The corridor already has Amtrak Acela, it has the Northeast Regional train, and we have all the commuter lines. We have MARC, we have SEPTA, New Jersey Transit, VRE, all these things. Our answer to that is all of those systems are critical. MARC is an absolutely critical system in Maryland. There's no doubt about it, and Amtrak is vitally important. But the bottom line is that they're just not enough. Our friends from MDOT gave a presentation about growth in population, growth in jobs in Maryland. If you look at the entire corridor, it's really astonishing how many more people forecasters are predicting are going to live in the corridor. 12 million additional residents in the Northeast Corridor by 2040, and nearly 5 million additional jobs. And if you're a frequent user, say, of Amtrak to go visit family in New York, like I am, it just doesn't work. Amtrak Acela runs once an hour, and that's okay, but that's not enough to accommodate that kind of growth in this corridor. And the Northeast Corridor is the economic backbone of the United States, and if we're going to keep pace in this modern world and make sure that we maintain kind of our preeminent economic position, we need better mobility of the corridor, and we really need something in addition to the existing commuter lines and Amtrak, and we think the solution that we need on the corridor is Maglev. Next slide. So what we're proposing is a Maglev system that will connect Washington, D.C. to New York, along with the major cities and airports between those two terminal stations. And it would travel at a speed of 311 miles per hour. That's kind of the cruising speed of the system. It's able to achieve speeds close to 400 miles per hour, but the cruising speed is 300 miles per hour. And at that speed, you would get from Baltimore to Washington in 15 minutes, and from Baltimore to New York in 45 minutes. Or total, if you're traveling, say, from Washington, D.C. to New York, in under an hour. And that would include 2 stops along the way, and we would keep alternating the stops. So we'd be launching, say, 8 trains an hour. If you're getting, say, on board the train in Baltimore at 9 a.m., maybe that train stops at Wilmington and Newark. And if you're getting on the train 10 minutes later, maybe that train is going to be stopping in Philadelphia, airport in Philadelphia. So it would all be based on the travel dynamics. It would be kind of a tailored operating plan. But the bottom line is, over the course of an hour, you'll be able to get anywhere in the Northeast Corridor in under 60 minutes. That's a game changer. I mean, if you take Amtrak right now, it's 2 hours, 45 minutes. And again, I'm not here to knock Amtrak. I love Amtrak, and I think Amtrak does an amazing job. But they have severe constraints on what they're able to do. And if you drive between, say, DC and New York, that's 4 or 5 hours. If you fly, that's short, but you've got to get to your airport, and then once you land in New York, you've got to get from the airport to downtown or wherever you're going. So that's 3 hours. So Maglev is like city center to city center, all under an hour. Did somebody have a question?
Yeah, so if Amtrak,
Yes.
This is a replacement system for Amtrak?
No, not at all.
Same tracks, or going to be the same tracks used, or new tunnels, new ways, new?
No. So actually, can we go to the next slide?
Yep.
So the way the system works is Maglev cannot operate on a regular railroad track. So this has to be completely new. So we are proposing a completely new right-of-way. We will not be operating on Amtrak's tracks. And actually, we have no intention whatsoever of this being a replacement for Amtrak. The idea would be that this would be an ultra high-speed option. Amtrak makes a lot of stops between Washington, D.C. and New York. Maglev would not make that many stops, but it would get you to your destination much, much more quickly. So if you want to go to New Carrollton and you want to stop and, I'm drawing a blank, say on some intermediate stop in Pennsylvania, Amtrak is probably the best option for you. If you're really concerned about, say, getting to a business meeting in Philadelphia or New York as quickly as possible, Maglev is going to be the option.
Would be like a little faster than the plane? By the time you go to the airport.
Oh,
safety,
it'll
security,
be-
and all of that,
It'll be 3 times faster than a
very
plane.
fast.
Yeah, because the plane, for example, if you want to fly to from say Washington D.C. to New York, you would have to go to National Airport, check your bags, wait in security, and then wait for you have to be at your gate, you know, a half hour before your plane leaves, and then you're in the air or on the tarmac, and then on the other end for an hour. And then you have to pick up your bags, get in a taxi, and get downtown. So that's 3 hours easily. This would be 1 hour. So, yeah.
And how long will this project will take to implement?
I'll get to that. That's a great question.
When do we start?
Well, the one thing that probably as an engineer, you know, building this, and I picture that it has to be flat and straight right?
Yes. Yeah, it has. You
to
can't
reach those speeds, right?
exactly. So, because the train is so fast, we can't have sharp curves. Otherwise, everyone's going to be stuck to the side of the train or spilling their coffee or something like this. So it has to be pretty straight, and that's challenging because if we could take sharp curves, there's a lot of roads and railroad lines, and we could kind of hug those. But we can't. We have to be relatively straight. So that imposes some constraints on actually where we can locate the right-of-way for the project. And I'll show a little bit currently what our concept is. But before we do that, let me just explain really quickly how the system works. So I'm not an engineer, but basically if you really reduce temperatures to an extremely low level and have a magnet, you'll virtually eliminate electrical resistance, and you can create this incredibly powerful magnetic force. So what we do is we embed these super cooled magnets in the side of the train, and we have these coils, electrical coils, alongside what we call the guideway wall. And we put a current through these electrical coils, and it creates a magnetic field with this embedded magnet. And because it's so cold, the magnet is super cooled, because there's no electrical resistance, the magnetic force is incredible. And it's able to lift up this huge train and move it at an incredibly high speed. So we have 2 types of coils, levitation coils and propulsion coils. And because there's no friction, because we're not relying on steel wheels on rails, we're able to have these incredibly high speeds because there's really
So
nothing.
basically, the system is not touching; it's on the air.
It's
like
floating.
an airplane.
It's floating. So it's almost like an airplane on the ground. Yeah. Next slide. So our colleagues from MDOT talked a bit about the environmental process that they're going through. We're going through exactly the same thing for this project. There's the EIS, Environmental Impact Statement process. It's a process. We're working very closely with MDOT. MDOT is actually the lead agency for it in the state. And there's a federal lead agency, which is the Federal Railroad Administration. They're jointly leading the EIS process because that's a government regulatory process. And that EIS process is looking at 2 alternatives for the maglev. And in the back, it might be, we'll share these slides, of course. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but the concept would be that we would have a station in Washington, D.C. We would be in tunnel, and the dotted line here is tunnel. And then around Greenbelt, we would come up above ground, and we would be on a viaduct, an elevated viaduct. And we have 2 alternatives. One, this is the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. One of our alternatives is proposed to be on the east side of the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, elevated. And the other one is on the west side of the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, also elevated. And there's various pros and cons to either of those. They look so similar on this map, but on the ground, they're dramatically different. Then we would go back into tunnel. We would go underneath BWI Airport. So right now, if you travel to BWI Airport on the train, it's a little bit inconvenient because you have to get off the train and then you have to get onto kind of a shuttle bus that will take you over to the airport. And that can take time. we're working with the airport management. We have a really strong, very constructive relationship with them to actually site the maglev underneath the main concourse area, so that you would get off the maglev, you could go up, and you would be right there where all of the gates are. Incredibly convenient.
Yeah.
And then we continue in tunnel to Baltimore, and there's 2 station options in Baltimore that are being looked at. One is in the downtown Inner Harbor area near Camden Yards, and one is a little bit further south on the South Branch. I guess one of the main things I would point out is that about 70% of this project is proposed to be in tunnel. For anyone here who's involved in engineering, you probably can guess, tunnel is a lot more expensive than building above grade. We did that very deliberately because these areas outside of Washington, around BWI and Baltimore, they're so densely residential that the only way we could have constructed them would be to have to, go through residential neighborhoods, acquire residential properties. It just, I don't think the project could have happened if we had to do that. So although it's more expensive to be in tunnel, we made kind of a strategic decision that most of this project would be underground. Next slide. So the gentleman asked about, so what's the schedule? And that's a great question. Right now, we're in this EIS and permitting phase with our colleagues at Maryland DOT and Federal Road Administration. A draft of that EIS document was released earlier this year in January. There was a public comment period. Maybe some of the folks here were able to listen in to some of those public hearings or provided comments, which is wonderful. If you did, thank you. The comment period wrapped up in May, and now the Federal Road Administration is going to have to process all of those comments, and they'll publish then a final environmental impact statement, and it'll identify a preferred route, a preferred Baltimore station, facilities, locations, blah, blah, blah. Once that happens, in principle, then we will be able to go into our final design, which for a project like this is going to be, a lot of money and take a bit of time. Probably a year and a half, 2 years for final design to do all of that engineering to 100% engineering design level. And then we'll be able to start construction. So if we can complete the EIS in 2022, and then say allow 2 years for all of our final permitting, kind of local permitting, fire code permitting, building permits, and all that kind of stuff, we should be in a position, I hope, to begin construction in 2024. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have to address the power grid?
Yes, and actually we're pretty deep into discussions with BG&E and Pepco. We're also looking at whether or not we can use renewables. We're coming up with a concept plan to at least power some of the maglev using renewable energy, wind energy. That's still pretty conceptual, but we will be relying on the PJM grid to power the system, and those discussions are underway with the providers. So, once construction starts, it'll last probably 7 to 10 years, and that will vary depending on some of the decisions that are made in the EIS process. For example, one of our station locations in Baltimore, one of the options is underground. Another option is above ground. An underground station obviously is a lot more complicated. It takes more time to construct and so forth. So depending on some of the decisions made in the EIS, that will drive the length, the construction duration. But 7 to 10 years, and then we will be able to begin revenue service. So that might seem like pretty far away, but when you consider a project that's 40 miles of linear infrastructure, a lot of it in deep tunnel, large bore diameter tunnel, which is relatively uncommon in the United States, it's actually a fairly aggressive timeline. Next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of the project. I won't belabor it because I know we're a little pressed for time, but one of the things that we see as a really major benefit of the project is not just the fact that you can get, say, from Baltimore to Washington in 15 minutes, but it also is going to improve your commute if you continue to rely on your automobile. And the reason for that is that our target market for the SC Maglev is actually automobile. We're not trying to steal Mark's riders, we're not trying to steal Amtrak's riders. Of course, some of them will be diverted to Maglev, but really the bulk of our ridership is coming from auto. And in fact, we're looking, and these are estimates that were prepared by the Federal Road Administration, we're looking at a reduction in regional vehicle miles traveled of about 12%, which is, given the volume of automobile travel that we have in Maryland and the district, it's one of the most congested areas in the country, as I'm sure our colleagues can attest. That's a really significant reduction to the tune of up to 16.4 million fewer automobile trips each year because those passengers will be diverted to Maglev. Next slide. Also, needless to say, this is an expensive project. Civil works alone are going to be in excess of $10 billion. So that includes construction of the tunnels, the stations, the viaducts. And there are going to be other costs for the system itself, for system integration, for soft costs, all these kinds of things. But from the civil construction cost alone of the project, the Department of Transportation is estimating that that's going to create 123,000 jobs. Actually, let me be very specific. It's going to create 123,000 job years. So that's one person for one job for 1 year. Those are construction jobs. It's also forecast to create 38,000 professional service jobs during construction. So those are service jobs that are not construction jobs. So things like, say, design work, architectural work, IT type services, anything not actual bread and butter construction. That's 38,000 professional services jobs during the construction period. This doesn't even factor in the tail end, which is that once the system is up and running, of course, we will need people operating and maintaining it, for decades to come. So it really is a huge boost to the regional job market, and of course, that's results in employee earnings. And Federal Road Administration is estimating $8.8 billion in employee earnings, and that money presumably then gets reinvested into the local economy. So it's a tremendous stimulus to local GDP, regional GDP. Next slide. So another important point that
Who's that guy?
I don't know. This is some very handsome guy. Really likes Maglev. He looks like he maybe had a beard at one
Stay
point,
thirsty.
So this is something we're really proud of and excited about, and this is from an event. This photograph is actually from an event in Annapolis, I think back in February, where the company unveiled some early, these are kind of preliminary goals that we've set for ourselves. And I say goals because, or preliminary, because I actually imagine these numbers are going to be somewhat higher, but we need to kind of manage expectations. But what we released back in February was that our goal is to fill 25% of permanent jobs in Maryland with people of color and women, and 40% of construction-related jobs in Maryland would go to people of color and women. And in terms of overall kind of business opportunities in the state of Maryland, the goal is for 25% of the project spend on construction to be in Maryland, and 25% of the project spend on operations in Maryland. And one of the questions we get is, well, most of the projects in Maryland, why isn't that number higher? The reason that number is not higher is because a lot of the materials we need, like concrete, like steel, those are actually being sourced from outside of the state. So that kind of skews the numbers a little bit. But the actual construction jobs, the construction companies that are going to be building this system are going to be Maryland and Washington, D.C. companies. Next slide. in terms of career opportunities, I mean, I won't go into all this. I think some of these are probably very obvious to you, but one of the things that I would really emphasize about career opportunities for the Maglev is that these are some of these jobs, you know, many of these jobs are going to be kind of standard jobs. They're going to be construction jobs that we're all kind of used to and familiar with, but many of them are going to be pretty unique jobs. A lot of the software involved in this system is very, very unique to the system. The operation of the system, the maintenance of these, you know, superconducting magnets and bogies and coils. I mean, this is unlike anything that anyone has really ever done in the United States before. So we're going to actually have to invest in training a workforce in the district in Maryland that's going to be able to operate and maintain this system. So one of the things that we're doing now really aggressively is going out to local communities, local community colleges, local universities, educational facilities, and stuff like that, and trying to, you know, get people excited about this and figure out how we can partner with some of those institutions to kind of build up the Maglev workforce for the future. Next slide. I apologize for the slide. It's a little busy, so I won't spend too much time on it. But what we tried to do, and we'll share this with everybody, of course, is sort of figure out what are the main categories of types of jobs that we would anticipate for a system like this. You know, not just during construction, but you know, during actual operation. And sort of assigning some years of, you know, when we're going to be seeking to fill those types of jobs. So you can see some of the stuff, you know, it's coming up pretty soon. I mean, we're already in the phase of doing geotechnical. We've done hundreds of geotechnical borings already, and we're doing, you know, a lot of preliminary design work is going to be starting next year. So it's really moving pretty quickly, and you know, it's going to be a really broad range, broad spectrum of jobs that we're going to need to fill to make this project a reality. Next slide. That wraps it up. And actually, this photograph that you're looking at, this is the latest design of the Maglev that was actually just unveiled in Japan. It's the same, the inside of the train is all different, but they kind of changed the paint scheme and stuff like that. But so this is kind of the latest and greatest photo of the Maglev that is now operating in Japan and that we hope to bring to Baltimore, Washington very soon. So thank you very much. How many passengers fit? It's a great question. In Japan, so let me answer that first by saying we need to build this system the way it's going to be when it's operating all the way to New York. And that's a little tricky because that means we need a really long train set. So we need to start off with the length of train set that we're going to be using for New York. And that's a 16-car train set, which is like twice the length of, say, a metro train. And the reason for that is because unlike a regular train where you could just, you know, add cars to it or whatever, there's all kinds of technical issues with Maglev. The end cars are configured a little differently, and you have transponder locations and stuff like that. So we can't like start out with a 9-car train and then bump it up to 12 and then go to 16. In order to do that, we have to shut the system down for months at a time, and that's just probably not tenable. So we're starting out with a 16-car train. The answer to your question is I don't know. I can tell you in Japan, they're assuming they'll be able to have, I think, about 800 to 900 passengers on a 16-car train set. However, there's a couple factors in the United States that suggest we probably won't have that many people. One is that Americans are bigger than Japanese, and that's just a fact. There's a lot of statistics on this. More muscular. Americans are bigger, and they need more space, what we call seat pitch. So that's a factor. The other factor is that we have to figure out how we're going to handle very strict and very good requirements for Americans with disabilities. And there are ADA requirements. They're called Americans with Disabilities Act. And we want to make sure that the train is accessible to our passengers that do have disabilities. But with that, there's a lot of work to be done on things like emergency evacuation for those passengers and toilet facilities for those passengers. So just to give you an example, in Japan, there's like only a handful of toilets on the cars. In the United States, typically for intercity passenger rail, you're required to have a restroom facility that's ADA compliant on every car. And that takes up a lot of area that otherwise would be for seating. So this is a long discussion we're gonna have with the Department of Transportation, and a very important one, because again, you know, we want to accommodate all those passengers that we can, but it will impact the number of seats. So it'll be less than the 800 or so that they have in Japan.
Question?
Just a quick question. I know we're about 12, 13 years from this.
Yep.
So you probably won't know the price point or the cost for this, but in comparison to the other complement services,
Yep.
what's that difference increase? Maybe you'll accept Bitcoin by then.
Yeah, no. Yeah, we'll see about Bitcoin. I don't know about that, but so we actually have looked really closely at cost, and there's been a lot of, so there are opponents to this project. I'll be very upfront about that, and that's fine. And we value their input, and we try and engage with our opponents, you know, and understand their concerns, and try and figure out ways to address them. One of the unfortunate untruths that has been put out there, you know, deliberately or not, is that the maglev train is going to cost $80, and it's going to be designed to take rich lawyers from Washington, D.C. to, you know, games at Camden Yards. False. It's false. Okay?
80 to New York or 80 to Baltimore?
To Baltimore.
Okay.
And it's not true. What we did, so when you do these transportation type studies, what you're trying to figure out is, you know, what is people's value of time? How much are they willing to pay for an extra minute, an extra 2 minutes, an extra 15 minutes, an extra hour? So you kind of come up with a pretty wide range of price points, and you figure out, like, okay, you know, are there people who are willing to pay $80? And the truth is that there are, right? If you're a business traveler and you are late to catch an airplane because you need to get to BWI for a business meeting somewhere, you know, in another city, and you buy your ticket 5 minutes before your train leaves, you might be willing to pay $80, right?
And I imagine that's probably very enticing when you compare it to, like, I'm running last minute flight to BWI. I live in DC and it's raining, and Surge Pricing now has that as $150.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely
I
right.
mean, an Uber ride
An Uber
costs
ride
you
would
about
be
$50,
$60.
$60.
But the reality is that most of our tickets are going to be probably in the $20, $30, maybe $40 range. And people say, well, gosh, that still sounds like a lot, because like MARC tickets are $8 to go from Baltimore to Washington. But I would make a couple of points about that. MARC is great, but MARC is a slower commuter service, right? So you pay for speed, you pay for that value of time. So it is more expensive. And MARC is subsidized. So although it may seem inexpensive when you're paying at the fare box, taxpayers are actually paying. So it is coming out, you know. So there are, and I think there's great reasons why MARC should be subsidized. I completely agree with it. But to be clear, a MARC ticket is not really $8. So this, you know, we're going to employ variable pricing. If you buy your ticket, say you buy a monthly pass, or your company offers you a monthly pass, or you know that you're going to be taking your kids to the aquarium in a week and you buy your ticket ahead of time, you're probably going to be paying closer to that $25 range. But if you're that business person rushing to the airport at the peak of rush hour, you'll pay a premium for that.
Well, I mean, you can get a salary from New York and live in Baltimore.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's very attractive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It really changes the way I think people think about where to live, right? And you know, there's all kind. I work in DC, although our main office is in Baltimore. But you know, there's so many dynamics right now underway in those cities. I mean, there is an affordable housing crisis in Washington D.C. right now, and Baltimore has lost 5% of its population.
Mhm.
So if you introduce Maglev, and that 5% population loss, I mean, that's kind of new information that just came out, I
Yep.
think about a month ago, but it's astonishing drop in population in the
Mhm.
course of a year. But if you could travel between those two cities in 15 minutes, I mean, you would go a long way towards solving both of those problems because there's much more affordable housing in Baltimore. It would incentivize people to live in Baltimore,
Mhm.
and it would help solve DC's affordable housing crisis.
So I
So,
got a question for you.
Yep.
So you said that this project is gonna take completion between 7 to 10 years.
for construction,
approximately, right?
yes.
So, between that period, is there gonna be sectional, sections that are gonna be operational?
Yes, no, there's not.
The DC to Baltimore.
Yeah, so the system has to be completely built and then tested. And it has to be tested as a total system.
So
We
fully.
can't, yeah, it's a little bit different approach to kind of trains, but the Japanese approach to trains is, it is a total system. It is completely integrated. You can't build a piece, operate it, and then kind of go. Everything is synchronized. So the operations at the maintenance facility are synchronized with the operations at the terminal station, and that is why the Japanese are able to run trains with an annual delay of less than 30 seconds, and they've never had an accident in 60 years, because it's a total system. But we have to build it as a total system and then test it and certify it as a total system. So we can't just build a piece, run it.
So there is
But
you'll be able
to
to-
DC first.
Build phase one.
Yes,
which is
DC to Baltimore,
DC to Baltimore
Yep.
completely,
completely.
and then move on to the
Yes,
next
yes,
phase.
yes. So we'll operate DC Baltimore. That'll start revenue service
Okay.
in 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on. But we can't do like,
No agile development.
we can't do like, a section in Anne Arundel and see if it works.
Yeah, no, that was what I was referring to, yes,
We
from
can't.
city to city, yeah.
Yeah.
City to city, yes.
City to city will be operational for ticketed passengers in 7 to 10 years.
And what is the noise level?
It's actually very low. The main noise producer on a conventional train is the pantograph. It's the thing that sticks up out of the top of the train and connects to the electrical wire.
Mhm.
That creates that kind of screeching noise. We don't have that, and we don't have any wheels, so there's no screeching wheel sound. So there is it's interesting, there is a noise, but it's very short because the train goes by so quickly. So unlike, say, a metro train, which, you can stand there and you hear it, you hear it, you hear it, you hear it, you hear it. Maglev, if I'm standing here, the train passes me in just a matter of seconds, unlike a regular train. So there's all kinds of different ways that we mitigate noise with tunnels, with hoods, with, things, sound barriers and things like this. But, say we have a noise wall and you're 25 feet away from the wall, maybe for like 3 seconds, it's 70 dB or something like that.
So you mentioned like some of the design stuff has already started, like you started doing geotechnical borings and stuff like that.
So,
How does a DBE firm get involved? Like we're a geotechnical firm.
Yeah.
Like how do we connect with Northeast Maglev or what was it, the BWRR
right.
and
So,
meeting the
Yeah,
goals,
so
their
the
goals?
geotech that we have done has been really limited, and we did enough geotech that was necessary for the environmental impact statement. So it was a fairly small boring program. The boring program the full boring program for a project like this is going to be pretty huge, because it is so tunnel intensive. So what, I think what you could do is give me your contact information or email us. We do keep kind of a registry of firms that have expressed interest. And what will happen is once we do really begin the preliminary engineering in earnest, once we're kind of through most of the difficulties of the EIS and kind of figuring out what the preferred alternative, because what we don't want to do is do a bunch of borings and then realize a different alternative is selected. But we'll start having open houses for industry and stuff like that, where people can come in to kind of hear about specific contracting opportunities.
And will you have like pre-planned stuff, like percentages at each phase for DDEs? Because like obviously like, and all the small firms are not gonna be like, yes, we've worked on the Maglev or like we have more limited experience, more limited capabilities. So there's obviously stuff that's on the simpler side because you're gonna go the bigger firms like who've done massive transportation. Like a small 20-person company can't say yes, we've done multi-billion-dollar projects. But say you've done pieces here and there. It's like, so do you guys have a plan, or you're just gonna figure out how to like
So, I mean,
incorporate device?
yeah, I mean, actually, the company that we used to do our initial boring program was a very small company, minority-owned company.
So one of the things that they're doing is partnering with like the Maryland Hispanic Chamber to be able to help them reach out to the small businesses and make sure that there are programs that you guys can get on to be along with the primes, and the primes, they're gonna set some goals and small business or minority goals that they have to be met, just like an MDOT project, and have the different percentages, and by teaming up with like the Maryland Hispanic Chamber, we're gonna be helping and be the link to make sure that the small businesses are also included on these big projects.
Are you guys exploring any like mentor protege kind of programming where in big DOT, in big federal projects, a lot of times there are contracts that are awarded contingent on the prime educating and assessing a small business on how to do that kind of work. I imagine that's at a very interesting point that there aren't a lot of companies that have done this before. Certainly not in the U.S. It has not been done in the U.S.
Correct.
So you mentioned too that, so you guys are reaching out to colleges and for training, right? And so perhaps for the people that are here, the ones that are interested, like him, you say Marco and the Chamber of Commerce. How do you guys act on to getting to him and then out here to the people that are interested in investing with the companies and in the training? So what do you offer that? We're not in college. We're right here out of the business life. So how do we train ourselves and our companies to be ready for when the phase comes?
I guess it depends on the specific kind of skill that we're talking about. So, if it is something like borings, that borings are the same whether you're doing them in Japan or whether you're doing them here. If it's some kind of more really discrete thing, say with communications equipment for the system, that's going to be, we're going to have to go out to the market and find a company that has some kind of expertise in that. But a lot of this stuff is, and I don't know what kind of company you represent, but a lot of the types of things that we're talking about, the construction, the borings, the engine, even the engineering, I mean, a lot of it is something that doesn't require new types of training. But some of the maintenance that we're talking about doing, like maintenance on the magnets or maintenance on the coils or on the rolling stock, that is going to require us to, train people to do that, because that capability just does not exist. So we're going to be looking to do that with college graduates, because we want mechanical and electrical engineers who have that type of expertise, who will then come work for the company. But we're also, I think what we're probably going to end up doing is creating some kind of a maintenance company.
So I'm assuming the open houses are going to be the key point for like learning a little bit more about that. And when would that be prior to the starting of the project?
I think we'll probably start having things like open houses and contractor events after the EIS is over. So sometime probably late 2022, early 2023 is my hope.
Okay.
Great. This was great. A lot of great information. You guys digest and get ready for this, because there's going to be a lot coming. I'd like to thank, all three organizations are partners of the Maryland Hispanic Chamber, and we looking forward to continue being partners and continue helping each other. Gabriel, anything else you want to add in terms of insurance? You want to, that, you know, some of the companies that are gonna get involved on these big jobs, they're gonna need some insurance, right?
We're just ready, but you know, it's very interesting. I mean, the information we've got and you know, we're further to post it later. I think it's very interesting. As an insurance company, of course, we're ready and we're working with some of these contractors already. You know, providing bonds and anything that they will need for these kind of projects, right? So yeah, I mean, we're ready
Thank
to
you.
show that train.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sponsoring the event.
Thank you for coming, actually.
The RNG is also a sponsor of the chamber, and we're happy to have them. If you guys love cold pizza, it's back there. Let's have some cold pizza, and there's some drinks and all that, and I really thank you for being here, and we'll do this again.
Great.
Thank you. Oh, can you do a picture?